perspective, first major event I'm playing in internationally, representing the United States of America, representing the great stars and stripes, and I had a pretty good event up to this point. Now, going into the second to last round, I believe that I was in, I want to say like fourth or fifth position. So I was right outside the medal. I was right outside the podium, first, second, and third, doing really, really well. And in this game, I played Baramidze, and we'll go through the game. Obviously, I said it's a painful loss series, so I lost the game, which meant that I kind of I didn't finish in the top 5 in the event. So it was very, very frustrating. But the thing is, you learn from these experiences. But nonetheless, let's go through the game. So the game goes e4. Pawn to c5 here, and I played knight to c3, knight c6, pawn to f4. So this was an opening that I learned probably when I was about 8.5 years old, when I was about 1600. He taught me a lot of the ins and outs. Now, of course, I will do a series on this down the road using my games. But in terms of just like my knowledge base, and to show you how different chess is, when I played the Grand Prix, my knowledge at the time was pretty much, well, black can play g6, black can play like e6, black can play a6, and so forth. Now, there are many different setups, but the themes of what you play for in the Grand Prix are pretty familiar. You generally try to move the bishop, move the knight, castle your king, and play for queen h4, f5, some long-term attack. So Baramidze plays g6, I go knight f3, bishop g7, and now I play bishop b5. Now, for reference, my stepfather, I believe in 1997, I think probably about 5 months prior to this event, he had played an open event in Hawaii right before the United States Chess Open was held, and he had played the same setup. So because of that, I was pretty familiar with the setup in general terms and what you're trying to do. So here, Baramidze plays knight to d4. Of course, black doesn't really want to let you say take and double stack the pawns on c6 and c5 here. So knight d4 is a logical way of preventing that. So now in the game, I played bishop d3. Now, this was the under 10, you guys, in 1997. Now, 2 years later, I believe, or maybe it was 3 years later, I played against Sir Gawain Jones from the United Kingdom. And in that game, I actually played this move pawn to a4, which I think at the time had already been played a little bit, but it was not considered a main line. Now, those of you who have watched a lot of my streams probably have noticed that I've played this a4 line quite a bit online. And you're probably wondering, well, like, why do I just always blitz out the setup? And it's because when I was young, the Grand Prix was the setup I played. So it's still relatively playable, and it's very much from memory. So in this game, I played bishop to d3, and now Baramidze plays pawn to d6. Very important to note that even back in 97, it was already known that if black plays pawn to e6 here, this is a big mistake because white can trade and go knight to b5. And you know what's going to be funny about this, you guys, is that modern day computers are basically probably going to say it's not a big blunder. So as you look at this position, you see a computer says zeros. And the reason, gotta go now, talk later. And the reason it says zeros is because after d6, c3, apparently the computer says, I don't care about rules. I don't care about a pawn on d4. I'm just going to sack a pawn on d4, and I don't care, and I'm just okay. Again, without strong computers, it's not very human. As I remember from what I looked at the time, the move here was c3. And so black, of course, has to do something because otherwise you're going to take the pawn. So black takes on c3 here, and now you play the move pawn b2 takes c3, and it's very, very bad for black here for 2 reasons. First of all, you're threatening bishop a3, which undermines the pawn on d6. Secondarily, if black tries to kick the knight out with a6, you go queen to a4, and black cannot recapture the knight on b5 because you take the rook on a8. And if black moves, say, the king to e7 after a move like bishop to a3, well, maybe not bishop a3 here, but even just a move like knight d4, white is just much better. After a6, queen a4, if bishop d7 here to try and break this pin and support the rook, white can just take the pawn with check. The king has to move, and then you just move the queen to like a3, and white is just up a pawn and completely winning here. So he plays d6 in the game, so I trade. I go knight e2. Now, mind you, this is still my preparation at this point. And the idea behind trading here is very smooth. Let's say black plays knight f6. You want to castle, and go pawn to c3. Take with a d pawn, and you open up the diagonal. And you, again, play for queen e1, queen h4, and pawn to f5. And again, objectively, it's not like this is anything special for white, but the purpose of me not even showing the game, but the purpose of me talking about like themes and being important is because what you'll see is it's a very free-flowing and very smooth idea. It's not something where there are a lot of tricky spots here in this position. Black can play d5 or e5, but there's their pawn pushes in the center, but white's idea is very smooth. You play like queen e1 and queen h4, and you just play the game of chess. It's not something where you have a 20 move variation and you have to remember every single move. So it is really important to note that, like, one of the things that I really do credit to my I really need to up my swagger, dude. Thank you, appreciate it. You guys are very, very weird today, but I love you nonetheless. So here Baramidze plays e5, which objectively is not a great move, but it makes some sense because black supports the pawn on d4, and of course if you take, he undoubles the pawns, which is exactly what black wants here. So here I castle. Baramidze plays knight to e7, and now I play pawn to c3. Again, one thing that I would stress before that's really important is that I'm playing for a very basic setup. You see, no matter what he does, whether he plays e5 or e6, I know my idea is to play c3, open up the diagonal, and try to play for queen h4. Very, very smooth. Very important. So I play c3, and now here Baramidze castles, which is an excellent move. And one of the reasons that I lose this game is specifically because I don't get the position that I'm aiming for, or that I'm angling for here. So after castles, you see, I don't get to capture and develop my bishop. So it's kind of weird because I have to deal with this problem with my bishop, but black also has double stacked pawns on d6 and d4. Now here I play bishop c2. Now again, objectively not a great move, but it's very difficult to play because what I'm looking for is how do I develop my bishop on c1. Either I have to push this pawn and develop to b2 or a3, or I have to move my bishop, play d3, and try to open up the diagonal. So here I play bishop to c2, Baramidze goes queen b6, and now I play pawn to d3. And the idea here is that, again, I'm opening up the diagonal for my dark square bishop, so it makes a lot of sense. But the problem with this is that even though I open up the diagonal for this bishop potentially, my bishop on c2 now is very bad because it's stuck behind the pawn wall in front. So the only way to really get the bishop out of this, off a bad diagonal, is to try and use this diagonal. So there are pluses and minuses to both sides. So d5 is played here by Baramidze, an excellent move, by the way, because now if I take the pawn, he just takes, and he's very happy because his knight is plopping to e3. Additionally, he has an open e-file, and third, he also has bishop g4, putting pressure on the diagonal. So in this position, I don't really want to take, but the problem is if I push here, it's the same thing. He moves the knight to f5, the knight is coming to e3 again, and black's getting a very, very advanced pass pawn on e3. So I've concluded I can't move the pawn. But let's just say I make a random move like a4. I have to deal with the issue that after pawn takes, there's pawn to d3, which fossilizes the bishop on c2 and the knight on e2 because the king is in check from the queen on b6. So it's a very tough spot. So here I play knight to g3, which again, this shows you I was not a super strong player, because even though it avoids the tactics, it allows another problem. It does not actually solve the issue. Like, the big issue for me is the knight is coming to e3, which is why I can't push the pawn. But when I play knight to g3 here, Baramidze correctly takes. Of course I can't take because of the same problem with the check. And when I take with the knight, his juicer is coming into e3 anyway. So I have a knight on e4 versus e2, but the knight coming to e3 is very problematic here. So probably what I should have done was king h1. But anyway, I play knight g3. He takes, I take with the knight, he goes knight to f5. Go king to h1, and now he plays bishop to e6. And the problem is knight e3 is coming here. He also can put the bishop on a very nice diagonal from d5 to h1, targeting the knight on e4, the pawn on g2, and the king on h1. And also he has knight e3 at some point, so just to highlight it, where we get this position, now his other op is aiming right down towards b2. So the two ops are a big problem in this situation for white. So here I play g4. Basically, again, being very aggressive. I was very young at this time. I was a very aggressive player, and I try to go all in, hoping that my attack crashes through. So here he goes knight to d6, which I think is a move. It's not the best move, but Baramidze, again, we were both pretty young. We were maybe like, we weren't, grand masters. It was a very tense game because the winner of this game probably was going to have a chance to win a silver or bronze medal in the event. So I played g4. Baramidze goes knight to d6. Which is not best. He should have gone knight e3 and avoided the boogeyman, because after takes f5, bishop d5. It looks like maybe I have some attack, but I really don't, because the bishop on d5 is aiming towards this diagonal e4 and h1, and the other op is really doing well on g7 too. So he should have gone knight e3, but anyway, he goes knight d6. I play h3, and now he plays f5. Another very strong move by Baramidze. One thing you'll notice is that I've made a classic mistake of pushing my pawns in front of my king. And that's one reason that, like, very oftentimes when you think about something like PogChamps, we really do stress you don't want to start flinging those pawns in front of your king, because it's very easy to end up in a situation like this where your king is kind of open on h1. Kevin Bordy played in the same event. That's pretty funny. So anyway, f5, so I go knight g5, he checks, I play king to h2, and now he goes bishop to h6. Not the best move. I think h6 was fine, although actually, you know what, the computer says bishop h6 is the best move. Wow, interesting. I assumed rook e8 or h6 were better, but anyway, bishop h6, bishop d2, rook c8. Another logical move, puts pressure on the bishop on c2. Black activates the rooks to 2 open files where there's a lot of scope, the c file and then the e file. So perfect placement of the rooks by black as well in this position. So bishop to a4, pawn takes g4, so now I play bishop d7. Baramidze takes, I take the rook. I could have taken the bishop here, I guess, but it's still very bad. He has g3, and if I take, there's some kind of nasty fossil coming with knight f5 or knight e4. I'm going to lose the bishop on d7, and my king is just toast. So instead I play bishop c8. Now Baramidze correctly recaptures with knight, and the reason that this is losing now is because you think, well, I capture the bishop. Black has a rook, a knight, a bishop, and I have 2 rooks and a bishop, so I'm ahead by a rook for a knight. The only problem is my rook is not worth more than a knight. It's in the corner, and the second problem is that my king is completely naked. He plays queen c7 check, and if I go king g1, he plays the move queen to g3, which is just checkmate. King has no squares, bishop covers everything, and the queen covers everything too. And so after queen c7, the only move is bishop f4, but after rook takes f4 again, my king is too open, and black is going to be checkmating very shortly. So after knight c8, I play h takes g4. Baramidze plays queen d6. Excellent move, trying to recapture this pawn at f4 because he's attacking it with the queen, the rook, and the bishop. I'm only guarding with the bishop, the rook, and third, my king on h2 is pinned, so it's just lost. So I go king g3, bishop h6, queen e1. The rest of the moves don't really need explanation, so I'll probably go through them pretty quickly. Queen a6, queen e2, so I guard the pawn. Knight d6, queen e5, and I blunder queen takes d3. But in the spirit of chess, I play king to h4. No fear, use that king. The king is an attacking piece. Baramidze takes, I take back. He plays rook to f7. And now if I take the knight on d6 here, he has queen h2, which is checkmate. King is stuck here. The bishop and the queen cover the critical squares. So I go g5. Queen h2, king g4, and now Baramidze plays knight to f5, creating a bit of a mating net. The idea is, of course, queen to g3. There's also queen h4. There's also the family fork with knight to e3 as well. So now I go queen d8, bishop f8, king f3, queen g3, king e4, rook e7, king d5. Now he plays knight e3, king takes d4, knight f5, king c4, rook e4, king b5, knight d4, king c4, knight c6, and now I finally resign this game because I literally just moved my king all over the board, and now I get fossilized. The queen is under attack, but the king is also in check from the rook on e4, and in this position, I resign the game. So there's not really a whole lot that I would say in terms of, like, you know, from the content standpoint, obviously, there's like quite a bit of interesting. There are a few interesting moments. And the first main point that I would say about this game, though, is you'll see that when I did not get my setup, when I didn't get the idea of bishop to e3, when I didn't get exactly what I wanted, where I'm able to develop, I really lost the thread very, very quickly. And that's why I very oftentimes will say, when people talk about playing something like the London or all sorts of system setups, problem with playing the system setups is that if you become unfamiliar with what you do, if you don't get exactly what you want, it's very easy to lose the thread. And very frequently that's what happens, including in this game, where I had my setup, but I didn't quite know what to do when I couldn't get my bishop developed. And the second thing I would say is that also it's really perseverance. So I remember losing this game, and I think I cried after I lost this game at the time, because, as I said before, first real international competition, I had a chance to win a medal for, you know, the Stars and Stripes, and of course it did not pan out. But you learn from it. I remember the next day I came back, and I think I still won a very nice game the next day with the white pieces again, and I think I finished maybe like 15th to 20th roughly in the overall standings. But the point is, I lost this game, and I was very upset, but I came back the next day, and I won the game. Would I say it pushed me to get better? Yeah, it was definitely. I was very upset at the time. with this game, but things happen.